Good evening, committee. Thank you very much for attending today. It's very nice to see you all. I'm Councillor Kate Weller, the Chairman of the Corporate Parenting Board. We're now being live streamed, so just to bear that in mind as we're speaking. What I'd like to ask you is, each time you speak, if you could introduce yourselves. It means that any of us who haven't met will know who you are, but importantly, those people, members of the public and other members who are watching, will also know who you are. So if you could do that, that would be very helpful. I'll ask Susan Dallison, Democratic Services, in a moment to just remind you of how you use the microphones, so that you're all aware of what you're doing there. And even if you think that you've got a nice loud voice and you don't need it, we do need it because we need it for the live streaming. So if you could do that for me, Susan, and then we'll go on to apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So if you wish to speak, then all you need to do is press the button on the right-hand side and the red light will come on, and that means you're live. And if you could speak fairly close to the microphone, then that will help with the sound levels. And then when you finish speaking, you just simply... and it will go off. And you can only have one microphone on at a time, so you do need to switch it off, please, when you finish speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Right, first item is apologies. I have apologies from Matt Chislett and Simon Fraser-Brown. Any other apologies? Oh, sorry.
There we go, thank you. Megan from Democratic Services. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Valerie Pothecary.
And Stella Jones, Councillor Stella Jones as well, okay. And I think everyone else is here as far as I can see. Thank you. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. Lisa Reid sends her apologies for today's meeting.
Next item is declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No, that's all clear. Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. Have you all seen and had an opportunity to look at the minutes of the previous meeting? Are you all happy with those? Anybody got any comments? No? Right. I'll sign those as a true record at the end of the meeting. Okay, thank you. Public participation. We haven't been informed of any public participation, have we? No? Great. Right. Can I invite Executive Director of Children, Teresa Levy, to introduce the meeting?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, panel. And as always, it's an absolute pleasure to be here and talk about our family, our children in care and our care leavers, and to think together about how we are dispensing that corporate parenting role. Today, we have 447 children in our care. That remains at the right sort of level for where we considered our action plan to be. The number is higher than probably it was targeted to be, and that's largely as a result of an increased number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children who have come into our care. At the beginning of the year, we had 9 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and today we have 30. And that significant increase is as a result of the National Dispersal Scheme, which I briefed the board on previously. Children are notified to us on a weekly basis, and to date we've been able to accommodate all of those that have then been dispatched to us. And I will bring some summary report on those young people and their needs and their experiences to a future board. We're coming to the point where we think that national dispersal process will slow down with us as we reach our limit, as I've said before, of 0.07% of our population. For all of our children, we continue with our very ambitious programme of making sure that we have the right level of sufficiency for those children. So at any one point in the next 12 months to 18 months, we intend to see a number of new children's homes opening. Many of you will be familiar with Dorchester Road and the 2 units there, but also looking at a range of other homes, many of them smaller, for purpose-built, personalised care for our children, which is what we know we need. We're also absolutely just launching our new model around family fostering, around Mockingbird, and around really thinking about how we get the right level of foster carers for our organisation. The new approach to that's already showing some impact. Last month we had 17 inquiries. This month already we've had 23. And when we launch the new model even further, we expect to see those numbers of inquiries step up. But as I said before, and as you'll all appreciate, we want those inquiries to be on a steady trickle rather than a flood where we're not able to respond to them. So we're managing that carefully to make sure that we can assess those carers as they come through. We continue to keep that conspicuous care attention to our children in care and their educational outcomes and their employment outcomes, and that work is continuing to improve under the steady gaze of the virtual school. We're not seeing performance exactly where we want it to be, in fact, not hardly at all where we want it to be around initial health assessments, and it's a conversation I've had in 2 meetings with strategic partners from health today to make sure those initial health assessments can be undertaken in a more timely way. Performance presently isn't where it needs to be, and we have identified that as an issue that the Clinical Commissioning Group are taking forward in the contract conversations. So I'm always incredibly grateful to our incredible staff. We've had, as everybody knows, 2.5 years of great difficulty, but actually what we're seeing is some really lovely work going on, both in our fostering service. Delighted to be able to have our foster care awards tomorrow night. And that's incredibly important for our children and for us to be able to celebrate those fantastic fostering families. The adults and the children that provide the care for those children is incredibly important to celebrate. So good to be able to recognise that tomorrow. And some great work going on in our residential services and in our field work and our quality assurance of that. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Some encouraging stuff and some still worrying stuff, but I still feel that we're moving in the right direction and we're not fooling ourselves in any way, are we? We're being realistic. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Carol Jones.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed a day of training with this lovely lady here on unaccompanied asylum children, and I know that we are sending those that we can't place locally to places such as Gloucester, Hounslow. And with the jump that we've had, are you satisfied that we're resourced with social workers and indeed with virtual school leads on those children? Because it's such a jump from what it was up to 30 in such a short space of time. Are we okay with that?
Thank you, Councillor Jones. It's a piece of work that I'm absolutely doing just at the moment with my finance colleagues. What people will know is that there is what's described as full cost recovery from central government. That I'm not sure is full cost recovery. I think it probably is full cost recovery for the cost of placement for us at the moment. And previously, where we weren't in such large numbers, it didn't have that pressure point. You're absolutely right. Today, with 30, that's probably 2 additional social workers, additional virtual school leads, additional independent reviewing officers. So we're just looking at that piece, not to separate them. Everybody appreciates they have exactly the same rights to children in care status as everybody else, but we do need to pay attention to what that resource is. The young people are going to a range of places around the country. Sometimes that is by discussion and agreement with them too. So one of the things that we're hearing from some of our unaccompanied minors is that they want to be nearer their own communities, or they may not want to be near a family member that's in another part of the country. So it's not that we're simply, furling them to the 4 corners of the wind, but really thinking about are there places and spaces that are more appropriate for them. Clearly, where we can, it's important that we keep them as close as possible because we want to do that intensive work to support them. They've all had a traumatic journey. That's their defining share. But they do come from a range of countries across the world. So I will bring a report to a future panel.
Thank you. Councillor Cathy Love.
Teresa just answered what I was going to ask, which was whether they were all in Dorset and how they were settling, but that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Councillor Holloway. I'm just grateful that the Director has raised about the concerns about initial health assessments, because those figures, to me, they are a little bit worrying. I would just like a little bit of maybe clarity as to why are those figures gone astray, and what can we do as a council to help improve that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holloway. So what we're absolutely clear around is that our notification timescales are right. We are advising our health colleagues in the right time frame that our young people are with us. We have a particular approach, our health colleagues have a particular approach to how they do those initial health assessments, and that's very much with the consultant lead. What we've been negotiating with them for some time is that actually our young people have told us they would very happily have that initial health assessment sometimes done virtually, in line with the other health approach of, meet us anywhere, and or have that health assessment undertaken by a nurse. Now, clearly, there's a complexity around this. And at one level, it's that the health colleagues are suggesting they want the highest level of medic to do this work, and we can see some of the ambition in that, but it's not helpful if that isn't then delivered. So we're attempting to negotiate having a real strong skill set, the right skill set for these young people. Actually, those young people who have had a virtual health assessment have given feedback that they wanted to continue that way. I suppose our abiding concern, particularly with our newly arrived unaccompanied minors, is that we need to be absolutely certain around their sense of well-being and their health needs. So actually having a face-to-face may be more important. So it's a real nuanced piece. The numbers aren't in the right place at all, Councillor Holloway, absolutely not. And we, as I've said, I've raised it twice now in 2 other strategic boards this very afternoon, and it's on the health agenda.
Thank you. No, if there are no other questions, we'll move on to the next item, which is Corporate Parenting Board Annual Report. In the absence of Matthew Chislett, I'm going to turn over to Louise Drury, please.
Thank you very much. So the annual report provides an overview of what we're doing well, our key achievements in the last year, and also some of those challenges that we've experienced and plans to address those going forward. It's really positive that the board has maintained consistent membership, which has enriched those developing relationships. Young people's voices have been prioritised by the chair, and as always, in which the board and its members can be held to account. The board has been required to meet a minimum of 7 times a year, but last year we met actually 9 times as requested by our young people to support their attendance. The board has received all of its statutory reports with regard to children in care and care experienced young people. And during in-public meetings, a comprehensive data set has also been made available. Our young people have reported in a number of forums that they have struggled with a number of online meetings during the pandemic. And as such, attendance by young people at board meetings has at times been sporadic. And this remains a key area of focus for Dorset Council, who really prioritise and value the participation and engagement of our young people. We are delighted to have our Youth Voice service, and through that service we have absolutely ensured that we have heard our children's voices through the work that we have been doing. Also, the Young People in Care Annual Satisfaction Survey was open to children and young people aged 11 to 25, and a clear recommendation from this survey was the need for a range of opportunities to be provided for children in care and care leavers to enable children and young people a choice as to how and to what extent they get involved. This has been heard, and the Youth Voice Service has co-produced and created a timeline considering future corporate parenting boards and children in care and care leaver forums to ensure our children and young people have an opportunity to engage with our members in places and spaces they are more accustomed to. So in summary, the Corporate Parenting Board continues to benefit from strong membership with positive relationships between councillors, officers that have met regularly throughout the year. This has ensured that all members are well cited, not only on key performance data, but also provided reports on activities and developments within the council. This has supported our overarching Corporate Parenting Board's ambition to be the best corporate parents with high ambitions for our children and care leavers. Are there any questions?
Councillor Carol James.
Thank you, Carol Jones, Minster Newton. When you say the young people struggle to get involved with some of the online meetings, they do have access to laptops, don't they? So it was a matter of time, not that they didn't have the equipment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, equipment is absolutely available, but I think it is more the medium in terms of being online and having, I think, the telly has had its time, and actually being able to communicate meaningfully on the screen has been a struggle.
Anyone else with any questions? Councillor Kirby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Andrew Kirby, Winterbourne North Ward. Just for me, so in July 2021, we were delighted to welcome a newly recruited panel chair. And sorry, I'm just reading the report, and it says, and through her leadership, we've seen development of processes to strengthen quality conversations in the panel, completion of member appraisals, and improve quality assurance. I think for me, what is good? What does good look like? And what processes have we got in place to ensure that we have that improved quality assurance? External from the panel and internal from the panel. And internally in the panel, I should say. There you go.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby. I mean, I think in this year we've been blessed with external scrutiny of our services, if I'm honest. So I think that we are in that space as I sit here now in the middle of a further SEND Ofsted inspection, on the basis that we've had a huge amount of external scrutiny. But we do welcome that. And we will continue to welcome peer reviews. And we absolutely welcome any of our independent chairs who are operating across a range of our service areas to really bring that to the table. And, we are very, very transparent around wanting to say we know we've always got more to do. Sometimes some teams are taking a little bit longer to get to that complete high level of performance than others. And that's not to kind of, to castigate them, because things happen at different stages in an organisation, and we know our fostering service has been on a really incredible journey with those staff working incredibly hard, and yet there's been a bit of coming and going and a bit of toing and froing, and with change comes another step up. So we are really grateful, and we'll have further conversation in the fostering report later about that external eyes. But we obviously are always with our Ofsted colleagues and having that external view of us, and really welcomed that earlier in the year. And they will again, in this 3 weeks, be looking at children in care and their experience where they have SEND. So it's an ongoing process.
Thank you. Cathy Lugg.
Councillor Cathy Lugg, Down North. We've invited our panel chair to the meeting, but we haven't actually sent her an agenda, so she's no idea what's going on in the meeting. So could we arrange for her to have an agenda so she knows when she's due to speak, please? Thank you. And could Teresa sit a little bit closer to the microphone? I'm struggling to hear you. Thank you. I'm a bit deaf, I'm afraid.
We'll get that agenda sent to you straight away. And I do apologise. We're down on sicknesses this week, so our admin isn't quite up to its usual great standard. I hope he's watching and hearing us saying that. We can do that. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, just on page 30 and regarding to safety, just wanted a little bit of, if we can discuss that, about number of allegations against foster carers on the figures on there. I just wondering if I could just get a bit of clarity. Is that because of the child does not feel safe, or I just would be grateful if we can, if we are allowed to discuss that at all, or if that's not the case. So I'd just be grateful for clarity. Thank you.
Councillor Holloway, I think you might be referring to the fostering annual report. Yes. And I think that's the next agenda item coming forward, if that's okay. We're on the Corporate Parenting Board annual report at the moment. That's...
Richard Biggs, Dorchester Poundby Ward. I think it's an excellent report. I think, having been involved this, I'm trying to think, probably over 10 years involved in Dorset County Council, you know, over the years, every sort of format has been tried, and we're always looking for ways to sort of get that engagement, because that balance between trying to understand the voice of the children and the formal governance areas. We've got some really long reports here, and it's some of these reports will only come to this. This is the only bit of scrutiny they get, as far as I understand it. If we're thinking with the Aspire one, so it's a difficult balancing act from this sometimes very dry element and that thing. And I think we're working through it, and I think we've got a reasonable way of doing it, splitting it out. But we will constantly review it. I think it's the output from that. Thank you.
Councillor Parry.
Just very briefly, Chair, and I was reminded in a meeting I was at this afternoon regarding the Mockingbird project, I also would welcome us using a language that I think we are more familiar with. So if we move away from talking about respite care and talk about sleepovers, I think that's something that our young people would far more relate to. No, certainly my own children would.
Thank you. I think that's a really useful point. And no other questions for Louise? Sorry, Kay. No, keep going backwards and forwards between myself and Louise. If there's nothing else for Louise now, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 9, Corporate Parenting Board, the promise. Who's presenting that? That's Kay, isn't it? Where?
Annual report.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to go on to the data set? Yes, I'm sorry, Kay. So you've got a respite. You've got a respite for the moment, so we'll do the data set. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You have before you the data set that has been really helpfully produced by Matt Chislett. The areas that I think I would want to draw your attention to, as we've already discussed, the performance regarding our initial health assessments, in addition to the comments that have been previously made by Teresa Levy. I am aware that additional clinics have been put on in April and going forward, and we will start to see the impact of those throughout the month of May. Also, I'd like to draw your attention to the data regarding missing children, in particular children who are missing more than one episode. And I'd like to give assurance that we closely track our children who are reported missing through daily missing meetings, and have noted that we do have a particular group of young people where reports of repeated episodes are evident. And we are using our place-based response in locality through youth at risk meetings, our CE champions meetings, to ensure that that risk is really understood and well managed. Also, we're working alongside our police colleagues to deliver trigger plans so that carers and residential homes are reporting children at the right time where there is concern for their welfare rather than just being out late. And this approach, we hope, will see a much better response for our children, and a response that doesn't just rely on a child being missing, but actually where there is concern for their welfare, even though we know where they are. Also, children living outside of Dorset, we can see that there is an increase there. And as we welcome more of our unaccompanied young people, we have just talked about this, it is likely that this indicator may continue to be affected because some of our young people are already settled in their homes outside of the county, and so it wouldn't really be right to move them. For others, we're unable to source a local provision that can meet their needs. We continue to monitor this carefully and continue to develop our sufficiency plans to have much more local provision available. Within the fostering data, we can see that there has been an increase in the number of inquiries, and there's also been an increase in the number of foster carers. And we are seeing more transfers from IFAs and inquiries from carers from other local authorities who are moving into Dorset. And also I'd like to draw your attention to the completion of pathway plans too. And it's very pleasing to see that there has been an increase there as well. Thank you.
Any questions, please? Councillor Biggs.
So bearing in mind that we've got the Aspire report on adoptions, obviously the key data that we measure, or the only information we've got to measure that really is on the adoption area, which has got a number of issues. Now, I suspect that's due to COVID, but I wouldn't like to see that as a sort of excuse if there is performance issues. I mean, March, February, they should have been able to do some work, and yet we've got 0 finalised adoptions that month. So I wonder if Director or Councillor Parry can answer that, please.
Thank you. Really good opportunity really to define exactly what's happening there. So there's something that we're terming the Somerset judgment, which is relating to the ways in which, again, health assessments were considered by the ADMs, the agency decision makers across the southwest. So it's called the Somerset judgment because the findings first took place in Somerset, but they were also true for us and a range of other local authorities across the network. The level of information that was provided to the agency decision-making by health was deemed by council and judicial review to not have been sufficiently full at the time of the initial ADM decision in a number of children's cases for those cases to go forward. I can certainly provide a link of the absolute finding for colleagues after this time because I don't want to misquote it, but fundamentally the situation of a range of local authorities and therefore the children awaiting adoption in those local authorities has been under consideration by Sir Macpherson in the last few months. That judgment has now concluded, and so for our 11 children that have been held in abeyance whilst that judgment was outstanding, we couldn't progress with them. We are now progressing those children in a timely manner. I'm hoping Michelle may be able to be with us later and she'll be able to tell you the timescale for each one of those children. But so COVID actually didn't slow us down. We did continue with introductions and we continued with a number of matches and final orders during the period. It was a bit delayed, obviously, by courts not being in session. But actually, this is a different matter, which I'll refer to as the Somerset judgment and circulate that to panel after this meeting.
I don't think we've got any other questions on the...
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, just going back to, obviously, I know I jumped ahead, I did, with that, apologies. Yeah, just on on page 30 regarding about safety, about the allegations made against foster carers, is that our children making in those complaints to us? I know the figures for last month were naught, but I just would be grateful if there was just some clarity on that, please. Thank you. Is that better now? Sorry. No, in regards to the number of allegations made against foster carers, on the data on that, it's obviously last month it was 0, but I just wanted to ask, is that when those complaints, is that our children just feeling not safe in that environment, or is it something a bit more complex than that? Why they're having to make those complaints? I'd just be grateful for clarity on that. Thank you.
Yes, so I think it will be a range of things. Sometimes it will be around children feeling safe, but it could be other issues as well. But that's really well understood at the point at which those allegations are made.
Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. As you'd expect me to say, we do take any allegation incredibly seriously, whether that originates from the child or young person themselves, or of course, we do have matters raised with us from foster carers as well in respect of some of those placed in their care, and we have to take a very, very robust approach in how we handle those, but obviously be sensitive about the matter as well. So if there is ever a specific case that we need to talk about, I'd be very happy to talk about it outside of this particular forum.
you very much. Councillor Cathy Love.
Just wanted to ask how long the allegations process is taking at the moment, because we've had experience of cases taking quite a long time and foster carers being left hanging, you know, wondering what's going to happen. Is there any improvement on that? I realise that some cases are very complex and involve the police, and that's beyond our control, but sometimes internally it seems to take a long time.
Thank you, Councillor Lugg. And I think historically I would agree with you. I think there were times when things took far too long. I think what we're seeing now, and the both the process around our local authority designated officer. So the process, just so everybody's clear, at any point in when there's an allegation against a foster carer, in addition to the fostering service themselves investigating that allegation, so does the local authority designated officer, who sits within our quality assurance space and is well supported in there alongside any police investigations. So, and that's not a Dorsetism, we're required to do that nationally. So sometimes those range of investigations can take a bit longer. It's right and proper that happens, because there are a whole range of different potential prosecution vehicles for that. But at the present time, having just reviewed the local authority designated officer report this week, I'm confident that we're progressing those things well. What I really want to be sure about is that where a situation occurs in a fostering family, and actually the support and challenge that's required, that goes in together. You know, there's a difference, isn't there, between a very clear allegation and sometimes standards of care is the language we'd use. And we need to make sure we get that right for our fostering families. It's essentially going to be the case that for many of our young people, they will be challenging to be living in a family setting, and then we need to be kind of keeping that balance right between having a support and challenge conversation about standards of care, really robust investigation where that's the right thing to do, including the police where necessary. And yes, then sometimes when that means that we have had to sadly remove a child, that police investigation can take some substantial time, and sadly often still not end up in a prosecution at that time. Just because of the nature of that process. But I'm confident at the present time that things are being progressed. But again, as Councillor Parry says, if anybody has any particular cases of concern, always make contact. That's very welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Carol Jones.
Thank you. I'm just on page 36. First of all, there's two things really. One, we've still got 5 young people in B&B, and I just wonder how they manage when it comes to sort of cooking meals or making their own dinners and so on and so forth. And are they on the housing list, and can we not get them out into something a little bit more permanent for them? And the next one, while I'm on, I'll carry on. The young people, the NEETs, I wonder whether we could drill down a little bit more, because we're not doing as well as we could do on that area. And I wonder if there's any correlation between the NEETs, whether they're able to read and write, whether they have good enough skills to actually take themselves through later perhaps in life. And I wonder whether we could drill that down a little bit, or whether we find that those NEETs actually have a higher chance of not perhaps being able to read and write properly.
Thank you. Coming to your first question, thank you very much. In terms of our young people in bed and breakfast, that's absolutely not where we want our young people to be. And we do have an enhanced response from the leaving care team. So we have within, very similar to a child protection process, within 24, 48 hours, we will be having an exit strategy meeting with our housing colleagues so that we can ensure that exit plan is really well understood and also expedited as quickly as possible, so that we're moving young people from bed and breakfast into more suitable accommodation. Also around that is enhanced visiting with the personal advisor and an update of their pathway plan as well, so that we have a really clear plan that supports and clearly identifies what needs to be in place for that young person to successfully maintain a tenancy going forward as well. We're engaging with our housing colleagues very closely, because we've been having a lot of conversations around banding, so the banding allocation process. We know that our care leavers are on automatically through that corporate parenting responsibility on a band B. But of course, we now have the opportunity to have really challenging conversations with our housing colleagues around where we think actually the needs of this young person requires an emergency response, and so absolutely pushes that young person into that band A response so that we have a much more timely response for them. But we are working together to reduce that number. Also having conversations about having an established quota of housing for our young people so that and the team has been working really hard to understand what that looks like and where is our housing need within Dorset Council. And so we can have those conversations with our housing providers, which then means that there is a much better market for us to access.
Thank you. Do you think we could know, but not now, in later reports, how long they're in B&B for? You know, perhaps the shortest time to the longest time. And don't forget my needs.
I think that would be really welcome to provide an in-depth report in terms of our young people, you know, and possibly, you know, with the opportunities that we have through our informal boards, we'll be able to have a much more detailed conversation about, you know, different circumstances and use some of our anonymised case studies too, which will be really welcome.
Councillor Parry?
Thank you, Chair. In respect of young people in bed and breakfast accommodation, I would very much welcome, if I can put it in those terms, a letter from yourself as Chair of this Corporate Parenting Board, directed to Councillor Graham Carr-Jones as the Chair of Housing. And I would put my own support behind such a letter being sent, because I really would like to see this change. It's within our gift to change it as a council, and I think we should do that if at all possible.
Discussion with you after the meeting, and I will certainly do that. Thank you. Thank you for the suggestion. Any other questions? Yes.
Lisa Lynn Scott, Principal Teacher. If I can just pick up on the NEAT question. So we've been looking in the virtual school at the 28 young people who are NEAT currently, so that's during year 12 and 13, so that's not all of the data that you're looking at there. And when we look at the reasons behind that, there are, for some of them, mental health reasons, for some of them, movement around placement moves. Some of them are very happy in paid work and don't wish to take up training or education, and we do support and try and encourage them to take up further training to link to their work, whether it's traineeship or apprenticeship. But for some of them, there has been, as you would expect, probably a pattern of missing out on education during their secondary education time. So I don't think it's necessarily, from what we've looked at so far, about not being able to read, although that is certainly something I'll go back and do a double check on. But there is a link between their NEAT status for some of them and their difficulties accessing education earlier on.
Perhaps when you've done that bit of an investigation, you could let us know and keep us updated on that. That would be very helpful. Thank you. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just going back to page 36 where it says education and training, obviously the data shows this is for 19, 21-year-olds. Do we actually hold data for 21 plus, because obviously care leavers is up to 25, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to be interested to see if we actually have got any data for those as well. I'd be grateful if anyone can answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holloway. So a number of those young people, of course, choose not to be in contact with us as they get older and get to that point. It is an area where we can bring some report forward. It's what's in this report, I guess, is what we have to report nationally. But yes, let's take that through as an action, and we'll bring a report back later.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, obviously we do have to report on young people up to the age of 21. And as Teresa said, if young people are in touch with us, then we will have that information. If they've chosen not to be in touch with us anymore, then we don't know. So If they're working with us, then we can definitely report on the young people 21 to 25 who are working with us and what their NEET status is. But there's going to be a degree of inaccuracy then because they've chosen not to be part of what we offer.
Thank you. Is that okay for you, Councillor Holloway, at the moment?
Sorry, yeah, just to come back. No, obviously, I totally understand and appreciate that. You know that some obviously when they reach that age they don't want no contact anymore. But it just would be probably quite nice, I think, for the board to know for the ones that do stay in contact how that how are they progressing in life? Are they moving on to university or apprenticeship? I think as a board, I think we would appreciate that sort of data if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll certainly take that on board. Thank you very much. No other questions on the data set. We'll move on to agenda item 9. And that is you, Kay. Please, Kay Wright.
Thank you. My time is now. Thank you. Good evening. Kay Wright, Youth Voice Manager, Dorset. And if you don't know, I'm also a Leaving Care Personal Advisor, part-time. So really pleased to be here speaking with you about the promise this evening, and that's the promise that you are all making to children and young people. So the pledge is a commitment to the children and young people in the care of Dorset Council. This sets out the help and support that is available and what children and young people can expect from you, their corporate parents. We were asked to review the current pledge, and our initial discovery was that we have been using the pledge and also making reference to having a promise in our corporate parenting strategy. Now, I was confused about this, so you can imagine our children and young people are probably confused. And the wording in the two areas were also slightly misaligned. So this gave us a really good opportunity for the team to work with young people to bring this all up to date. We also noticed the significant absence of health in the promise too, and we were keen to make sure that this was firmly a part of it. We want to make sure that we are monitoring the promise. It's not something that is written and sits somewhere on our website. We should be accountable to the promise, and we would like to suggest that you consider making this a framework for Corporate Parenting Board and perhaps the informal sessions that we have. We've also revised the Children and Young People Satisfaction Survey so that we are asking them how they think we're doing against the promise. And perhaps our new champions will have areas of the promise that sit nicely under their wing too. Finally, we'd really ask you to only use one word to describe this pledge, and we would like it just to be called the promise. As you will also see, sat next to me is CJ, so I'm going to pass the microphone over to CJ because CJ's has done a significant amount of work on this, and they've prepared something that they would like to say. So if you just bear with us while we do our technical handover.
Okay. CJ, care leaver, and I've been doing work experience with Youth Voice. I was asked to look over the promise and the pledge as it needed to be reviewed and updated. I could see some things needed changing. I also believed that things were missing or not relevant anymore. The old promise mentioned Dorset kids, and they lost the contract in 2016. Participation people took over in 2016, but they were not mentioned. I updated the promise and have changed it to Youth Voice, as that's who has taken over now. After reading through the pledge and the promise, I went through the titles separately and reworded them, removed some and added some things. Health was added as a section because it was not in the promise. However, it was in the old pledge, which was the corporate parenting version. As a team with Youth Voice and care leavers, we came up with what to put under health. And I mentioned sexual health because I believe it is important that young people know that they can get help and or advice if and when they need it. I suggested care leavers should meet their PA at 16, as this is when they become a care leaver and it makes it a smoother transition from when they become 18. After redoing the whole pledge, which we have renamed the promise because we wanted the pledge to be the same as the promise, I sent it to my colleagues and children and the young people at the Care Leaver Forum and emailed it to others that did not attend. So if they wish, they could give us their views. As a team, we present the new promise, which is appendix to the report.
Thank you. Thank you, CJ. So we're ready for any questions.
Can I, first of all, thank you, CJ. It's a great piece of work, and we're very pleased to see you this afternoon and this evening as well. And you're looking so well, so that's nice. Terrific piece of work. Does anybody have any questions for CJ on the promise? Councillor Cathy Lugg.
Councillor Cathy Lugg, I'm really pleased to see the updated version. Some of the things in here are things that I've been banging on about for a long time, about young people not being, everybody knowing that they're care experienced all the time, because, you know, that doesn't give them a chance to lead the life that anybody else lives. The only slight concern I have is under supporting you to be steady and settled as an adult, where we promise that they can stay with their carers when they're 18 if they want to, and that might not always be possible for the carers themselves. So I'm slightly concerned about us promising that they can do that.
Thank you. Yes, we are keen to hear any alterations that you think should be suggested before we publish this to children and young people. There were some other things that I think we had some good conversation about, didn't we, CJ, that CJ felt should be in the promise, but we knew that actually it would be unfair to promise that if we couldn't really deliver on it. So if there are some things like that that you think that we could just rephrase slightly differently, we'd be really keen to accept those.
That's why we put in one of the versions we put if they're a staying put carer, because you know, if the carer has decided that they will allow a child to stay with them past 18, then that's where if the child wants to stay with them came in.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's excellent. My only slight concern is a promise and a pledge. A promise is quite, we will, and there's a bit in there about we shouldn't promise something we can't deliver. So while I absolutely believe in 99% of everything in there, I think there's one or two, and I'll give you an example. You are given access, in other words, we promise that you are given access to mental health support when you need it. I know from history that it's outside our gift to do that. We best endeavours to set the system up, but sometimes there can be delays for the houses, so that might want to be rephrased somehow, that we best endeavour to give you the best mental health support available or something like that, I don't know. And the other one was on the next page about education, so if I can find it now. Helping you have aspirations for your future. So we promise that you have a good education and you will help to achieve. And I think for absolutely majority of children that does happen, but it's a bit of a two-way process. So if a child refuses to engage to go to school, and as I've seen in the past, you know, a child may do 2 weeks of doing power boating, is that us promising to give a good education? It might be the only thing we can get that person to engage with. So again, just a slight tinkering of the words would make me feel happy that we make available the best education, because it is a bit of a two-way process for good reasons why that child, for all manner of reasons, may not want to go to school or engage with the system. But, so that's my only observations, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm having a bit of a nightmare with IT today. I realised that I was actually working from a slightly different agenda too. Councillor Biggs raises a really good point about what we can't really actually promise. And I'm looking at things like the helping to keep you safe. We can support it, and the same with supporting our health and well-being. But I actually take a slightly different view on how we can move forwards with this. And for me, this is an absolute opportunity to be able to engage what I see is a multi-agency approach, to be able to take a promise across all of our Dorset organisations to support our young people and our care leavers. So there we go. I'm looking around here today, but we can promise and we can support some of those promises, but helping to keep you safe. And I don't want to take any. Being safe for me might be very different for someone else, but in terms of for me and my family's safety, that would mean having things like the police involved. We can't pledge for the police, but it'd be really good and fantastic if Dorset Police were able to come along and support this pledge or promise. I can't remember which way around it is. The new promise, and actually the same with our health colleagues. So we're all involved, and we take a whole Dorset approach to promising our young people that. I don't know who would like to do that work. Don't say it would be me.
Kay or CJ, did you want to come back on that at all?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting about including our partners in the promise. Obviously, the stance that we've come from with this is that it needed updating. It's not where we are now as a council and as a corporate parenting board. And I think that we were really looking at it with our lenses on and our glasses. What can we do in this room and as wider council as corporate parents, rather than thinking about the partnership. It didn't really. It's not sort of where we were coming from with it. But
it's a good point.
It's a good point.
Thank you.
I'm not going to say any more, otherwise I might commit myself to more work. But it's what we really need to get it done soon too. And that any extension to that doesn't cause delay, because actually we want to have a satisfaction survey that's checking on how we're doing, and and the more work or changes that we make kind of delays some of that too. So maybe we do another review soon.
I'm going to ask Teresa Levy to come in here for a moment.
Thank you, CJ and Kay, and it is a greatly improved promise. And I think we can probably overcome some of those problems in a fairly straightforward statement, which says something around we will promise to do our part and provide leadership to the broader partnership, because that is a role for us as a local authority. That is a role for us as a corporate parenting board. We do have health colleagues here tonight, but it's absolutely a good challenge. We need to make sure we have our police colleagues alongside us too. Our youth justice, our youth offending service, Youth Justice, I'll get it right. I got it right first time, David. Our Youth Justice Service managers here too. And so we've got that partnership, but I think probably just for those important detail is to say we will do our best. We will deliver our part of that, and we will give leadership to the partners. I think that would be helpful. And could I just finally say, I think that last bit actually should go up the top, because that we will always be kind. If we can't all promise that, then pack up and go home. So I'd like that to be the title, frankly. Thank you.
So really grateful to receive any feedback if there's any sort of tweaks of wording. If those in the room would be happy to email them to the Youth Voice email address, then we can follow that up. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think the recommendation is that the board are being asked to approve the new promise, and I think that we're probably a tiny way away from that, but we're very close to being able to approve it. I think we're all agreed that it is the right thing, but we need to do a few more bits before that, but we don't want to delay it any longer than we can possibly help, but we do need to make sure that we're not promising things that we can't deliver, because that's not what you want us to do, any of you, I think. So are you happy, members, that we say we need a little bit more work and we'd like this to come back and approve it very, very soon? Councillor Kirby.
I think what Director Levy said was actually where I was going with my point, and I think it's excellent. I don't think we need to postpone it or do any more work. It was my personal view. I just think if we could just literally add in that, Director Levy's very eloquent, and her words, I don't know if anyone got that down, but if, would you like to say it slowly? If we were able to take that in and add that into the document, that would be more than enough to keep me happy, and I feel as if we should adopt this today.
I'm getting nods from around. Is everybody happy with that, that we just add that little bit in of our partners and so on? Yes?
Sorry.
We amend the words as we discussed.
I'm reluctant for us to approve before we've seen amended words, and I don't like us amending on the hoof, as it were, not something that is so important going forward. So although I get that we don't want to delay it, but I want to get it right. Councillor Biggs, you wanted a word?
It's just to clarify whether the points that I'd made on mental health and education were also to be adjusted, yeah.
Yes. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chair. Like others in the room, I'm anxious that we don't delay this unnecessarily. I just wondered if your committee would be happy for yourself and Councillor Biggs to take a delegated position if they're in acceptance of any minor amendments that need to be done. I'm very conscious, for example, the comment that Councillor Biggs made around education. And whilst we can't guarantee the final attainment grading, we can certainly guarantee the opportunity of a good education. And it's those subtleties that I would be happy if your committee would delegate to yourself. But perhaps just...
Yes? Yes? Okay. In that case, Councillor Biggs and I will work with Kay and with CJ and with Teresa, and we'll add in those things that we've discussed now, and we'll get on with the job, so there's no further delay. Okay? Yep. Good. Thank you very much. Item 10, which is children in care at risk of offending and custody. David Webb.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm David Webb. I'm the manager of the Youth Justice Service. You'll have seen my report. I've structured the report in kind of two sections. So our first aim is to try to prevent children, including children in care, entering the justice system. And our second aim, if they do enter the justice system, is to try to reduce the risk of further offending and build on positive outcomes for the future. So in terms of the first part of that, one of the understandings over the years is that one of the reasons children in care may be more likely to end up in the justice system is that if their behaviour where they live causes difficulty, the police may be called, whereas for a child in a family home, that might not be the outcome. So we've established a protocol, which we've talked about in previous years, a multi-agency protocol locally to give support to children's homes and supported housing projects about when they should be managing behaviour themselves and when it would be appropriate to call the police, recognising that there are times when the police do need to be called when there's an immediate risk to someone's safety. It should be said, and it follows on that previous conversation, the success of our protocol is quite largely down to how committed Dorset Police are to not criminalising children in care. So they put a lot of effort into supporting individual projects. There's an allocated police single point of contact for each project that we're aware of, who can provide advice about managing behaviour appropriately when it is or is not necessary to call the police. If the police do get called, then we work with them to try to avoid a criminal justice outcome if possible. The out of area is, so some children are obviously placed out of our local authority area and we don't therefore have quite the same connections, and it's a different police force working obviously in a different local authority area. So sometimes we do see children in care receiving a justice outcome and entering the justice system for behaviour where they live in an out-of-area placement that we think might not have led to that outcome if it had been someone placed in Dorset. In the second part of the report, I've talked about given an indication of the numbers we're talking about, and obviously it's quite low numbers, and it's difficult to get into too much detailed conversation without potentially identifying children. But the numbers are relatively low, and our service is a multi-agency partnership across both our local authorities, so we work in BCP Council as well, but also Dorset Police, Dorset Healthcare and the CCG, and the Probation Service and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. So that multidisciplinary approach is very important. We have put quite a lot of effort into speech and language therapy. So we have speech and language therapists who undertake assessments of the young people we work with, including children in care. We can share that not only with them to help them make sense of some of the difficulties they've got, and often those needs have not been identified until they have contact with our service, but also we share that with carers and with other professionals working with that young person. And we also have become a trauma-informed service, so we recognise that often behaviour and emotional and cognitive development has been affected by events earlier in the child's life. And therefore we need to respond in a way that's attuned to that child's development, which may not be in line with their age, and it may lead to behaviour which is in a way a manifestation of some of those earlier harmful things that they've experienced. So that kind of guides our work that we do with young people. We do work, if a Dorset child is placed elsewhere, then we retain case responsibility, but we might ask the local youth offending service to do some of the face-to-face work. I've mentioned in the report the Child Safeguarding Practice Review, known as IRIS, because there was learning from that sad case where about the kind of effectiveness of cross-border working, if you want to call it that. And actually the pandemic, which led us to recognise that we can do remote work that we perhaps didn't think was possible, because we had to have virtual contact with some of the young people we worked with during the most kind of acute periods of lockdown, has meant we've recognised we can therefore keep contact with children that are placed further away. We don't necessarily have to do all of that as a face-to-face visit with the time and resources that entails. So I think we've got better continuity of contact with those children, especially if they sometimes have placement moves which can take them to different local authorities and therefore different local youth offending teams working with them. The continuity that we provide is important. And equally, we also work with some of the young people from other local authorities that are placed in Dorset. Finally, I mentioned in the report that although I'm very pleased to say that we haven't had any Dorset children sentenced to custody for over 2 years, and therefore no Dorset children in care or care leavers, we have had a small number from BCP Council, and we've done some view-seeking work with those young people in custody or who've been in custody, and some of them are now young adults. And the views that they shared, I think, were relevant for young adult care leavers in Dorset who may end up in custody, because going in and doing in-depth interviews with them gave a really rich understanding of what life is like for them, and that included feeling very isolated in the adult custody system, sometimes lacking visits, sometimes not knowing how the system works and what they need to do. So we're very mindful that although my service finishes work around the 18th birthday, and the probation service would take on those responsibilities, we do have a seconded probation officer who helps to make sure we get a decent transition and that we share information and manage that transition to probation. But we're thinking, what else can we do to support those small number of young adult care leavers who may be in custody?
Thank you very much. Have I got any questions? Councillor Biggs.
Yeah, so I know the police do a good job at screening individuals who have to stay overnight or whatever, and the mental health support is there. That's working well, as I understand it. Incidences where I had concerns perhaps before was in residential homes, unions may have a different view, because obviously it's a staff, it's workplace, as to what is assault, which can sometimes be what we might not consider assault, just, you know, pushing, shoving and being abusive. And I don't know how we deal with that. Is that an education post to the staff, or do we have different relationships with different unions, take a different approach? I just wonder your view on that. Thank you.
We talked about, the protocol, as I mentioned, is 5 or 6 years old now, although we review it. When we developed it, we had quite a lot of conversations, and we have some kind of children's home providers in the group. Our position was that we are not saying that staff who work with children should expect to be assaulted, or that there's no consequence if that happens. The position was that those incidents, if they do occur, can be responded to quite often without involving a criminal justice process. And that could include restorative work, possibly with someone independent from the setting, helping kind of repair the relationship, and maybe thinking of ways that the young person could perhaps make amends for their behaviour if that's appropriate. There's also very difficult, sensitive topic, because you don't want to in any way indicate some kind of victim blaming, but sometimes the interaction, the skills of the staff vary as to and how well they're able to avoid some of those incidents developing to that level. So, and then there are times when it is appropriate to call the police, and the protocol does make that clear that there will be times when the police should be called, and people working in those settings should feel that they are getting that level of support, whilst understanding all the needs of the child and making sure we have a really sensitive response to the child. So it's a difficult balancing act.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Councillor Kirby.
Yeah, I've got lots of questions, as always, Chair. I'm getting into my swing again. Now I've got a working computer. I just want to just drill down and have a think about why our children are coming into the youth justice system in terms of for what, I was going to say what crimes, but actually that's wrong, for what reasons. We've touched on things like assault and perhaps inappropriate behaviour in placement settings. So what are the reasons, and is there a main reason?
The offences by young, well, first of all, I'm pleased to say that we've got a very low number in the last year of children in care entering the justice system. I had a quick look earlier before the meeting, and I think, if my data's right, I think there's only one this year. So that we're talking low numbers. And in previous years, I did do some analysis of some of the repeat offending by children in care, and some of that was about interactions with authority figures. So that might involve assaults on police officers. Sometimes we've ended up supervising a young person, and if they continually fail to comply with the requirements of a court order, we end up having to take them back to court, so breach of conditions. So we're much better, I think, at understanding those issues now and engaging with the child in a way that enables them to participate in their supervision. So I've noticed, I suppose I'm saying, in the past, offences against authority figures may be part of the pattern. And in general, our offence types are common assault, criminal damage, theft are the kind of probably the three most common offences.
Yeah, Chair, I was just interested to see if substance abuse was one of the reasons why. And obviously, we'll be able to give them the help and support that they need to be able to break that cycle. My second question is around the fact that we are, as corporate parents, responsible for our young people up to the age of 25, and in the criminal justice system is set up very differently. We know that when you reach over the age of 18, they have a specialist sort of is it a specialist probation officer. My question is, sorry, David, I look at you like I need a response, and I haven't quite finished my question. So I think I'm looking for how do you, as in YOC, change now. Thank you, Youth Justice Service, support our children our care leavers that will have the same issues, and in terms of the historic problems that we know that our children in care come up against. How do we best support them? We know when they get to 18, it's just not going to magically disappear.
So in terms of the kind of legal framework, our role ends when they turn 18. We sometimes go on a bit after 18, but basically the probation service take over that work. We have a seconded probation officer who's doing really good work, not just with individual young people, but also in improving our transition process. So we would get a probation officer allocated. We would enable several meetings between our worker, the young person, and the new probation officer, and we'd make sure we share all the relevant information. Probation service has been through another restructure, having had the community rehabilitation company brought back in and unified into a single probation service. They are now, having gone through that initial process from last June, reorganising, and their plan is to create what they're describing as pods. And as I understand it, one of the pods would be workers who only work with 18 to 25-year-olds. So the idea is that probation will develop a group of staff who focus on that group, recognising that things like cognitive and emotional development and just general maturity continues into the mid to late 20s sometimes. So those young adults maybe need a different response from some of the older adults that probation would work with. And then we do need to do, I think, a bit of work to align that probation response, our service and care leaver services, to make sure we've got a joined up offer.
Okay. Have you got more questions?
Say it's out of your as soon as they leave, but I think it's gone some way to subdue me with the fact that there is this process in place for those 18 to 25. But I think that our push would be around, actually, let's challenge the probation service and say, actually, what are you doing specifically for our care leavers in Dorset?
What I'd like to suggest, Councillor Kirby, is that I think it's important that we do, but we probably can't at this stage. So can we do a little bit of work around that and perhaps develop that a little further? But I'm not trying to be dismissive, but I think it's too big a subject for us to try to cope with now. And I'll just get Teresa Levy to come back on that for a moment, if I may.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby, and thank you, David. I think I would really support this piece of work. When we look at the low levels of remand and custody for our children in care, it has been extraordinarily successful to not have any in the last 2 years. That's exceptional. And in fact, the one young person we had remanded left that provision very quickly into a mental health bed, and that was the right place. And I think actually what we can see is that historically, too often, too many young children and young people have fallen into the justice system because there wasn't provision there. And I think the work both of the Youth Justice Service and the Harbour model is really showing that evidence of absolute conspicuous care for these young people is keeping them out. And we know the research is really important. Keep them out altogether and keep them out until they're as young as they can and not get into it. But I would be concerned, and I am concerned, that actually we don't have the same outcomes of custody for our care leavers. So I would support this as a piece of work for the Care Leaver Board to really dig into and really understand what's changed. Is what we've done now enough that we're seeing that tailing off? And so those that are there now are historically there. I think it'd be a really good piece of work, Chair.
So certainly feel that it needs a little more investigation, a little bit more thought on that. I've got one question I'd like to ask. You were talking about in the event, and thankfully that's not happening very much at the moment, but in the event that somebody does have a custodial sentence, that they feel isolated because they don't have the family network of visitors and so on. So this is a question for you, I think, Kay. Would PAs continue that visiting process whilst an 18 to 25-year-old was undergoing a custodial sentence?
I know that my colleagues in the Leaving Care team visit young people in prison, or we use the email system that I can't remember the name of it, Email a Prisoner, I think it's called. All kinds of different things. Send them things in the post the same as we would other young people if we can get them accepted by the prison. But I know and I hear when my colleagues are visiting young people. So yeah, that does continue.
I think that's really important, having done quite a lot of prison visiting over the years. it's very easy to become very isolated very quickly, and you need that support system there. So I think we're asked to note this, and I think we have. We've also noted that there are some things we need to investigate further, but we also note that what's happening at the moment is good and shows very positive responses. So thank you very much for presenting that to us. And I think that we've finished on questions. We can move on to the next item, please. Item 11, fostering panel terms of reference and feedback from the panel. I think you've got your agenda and you're on. Thank you.
Was that me? I was just checking that you'd seen a copy of my report. Excellent. Okay, so this is my first presentation to the board, so I'm very pleased to be here, so thank you for having me. I believe oh, sorry, and I got it wrong straight away. There we go. My name's Leanne Chorley. I'm the Independent Panel Chair for Fostering and Permanence Panel, so that's me. Okay, so I believe I've given you a very full and transparent, but I believe fair reflection of my time as panel chair. If I could start by drawing your attention to page 5, I'm not sure on the agenda where I've got what page that is for you, but it is point 3, looking at some of the activity outside of the panel work that I've been doing alongside Louise and Jerry and other senior managers. The first one I really wanted to highlight was the commitment to recruitment and strengthening the central list. Dorset is a very large area with 4 panels a month. Currently, we have 9 members on the central list. As you can imagine, that does cause some challenges when it comes to quoracy on panel days, especially in light of COVID and sickness and absences due to that as well. So we have recently appointed 15 new panel members to the central list, provided that they fulfil all of the expectations with the references and enhanced DBSs. So that's a very exciting time for panel, and hopefully some of those challenges will be alleviated in the coming year. Another, I think, very important area to draw attention to is the implementation of independent quality assurance feedback to the agency. Obviously, you've got your internal quality assurance. We're now in a process where you're getting that independent quality assurance from the panel chair and the panel members as well. This allows the opportunity to, in a strength-based way, challenge any issues with any processes, or if there is any statutory check information missing, that can be done outside of panel rather than in an environment which it's not necessarily appropriate to discuss in front of applicants or social workers. So we can make sure that we're making sure that everyone is comfortable and it's being done in the right way. Panel members have all also had their annual appraisal, so everyone is all up to date. Everyone has a idea of training moving forward and access to training now, and they know how to do that and where to do that and when to do that. We have had a away day as well, which was facilitated by Mark Finnis. Did I say that right, Mark Finnis? Okay. And we came away from that with some real strong actions and some good actions for the coming year. There are obviously some areas still for development, as with all areas and all local authorities going through transformation. Some of these, and not all of these, we will be working on strengthening the voice of the child, and this means how we gather that voice. What does that look like? How do panel want to receive that information? And more importantly, how do the young people in care want to give that information? We've had comments and feedbacks that they don't want to fill in a form. It's very boring. Is there any other way that they can give their feedback to make sure that their voice is heard and acknowledged when people are making recommendations that affect their lives? Another area that we will be looking to strengthen is digital feedback to panel from applicants, from social workers, from existing foster carers, so they can feedback on their experience at panel. So we're getting a real full 360 picture of what the panel experience is like for everyone who attends. so that panel can continue to learn and grow alongside the service as well, and make sure that we're working to the best of our ability as well. And lastly, the last one I wanted to point out is, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. It has been a year of great change for panel. We have lost a lot of members. We have had new panel advisors and new panel coordinators. For the coming year, we're really going to be focusing on embedding these new panel members, ensuring that we're getting consistency with process, and with the appointment of a new panel coordinator and a new panel advisor, I'm hoping that this settles really quickly. I'll open it up to the board if they've got any questions that they'd like to ask me.
Are you open to questions straight away?
I think if we go to questions straight away, and then I'll bring in the annual fostering report.
Right, thank you. Questions? Councillor Kirby.
Yeah, if you haven't worked out now by Chair, I am an idiot. And my my agenda when I first downloaded it was slightly the wrong way around, which is why I asked that really weird question at the start. So, and I tell you, you've done a fantastic job of actually answering it, which is brilliant. So I won't highlight it again. But one of the areas I did want to look at is what does good look like, and how do we compare to other councils in terms of our figures? And I know it's a bit naughty. I've got a third sort of asked to it. Which areas are there? Which areas do you think the panel could improve upon? Sorry, that was a lot. That was a lot there. Lots of questions today.
That's all right. I think we could improve on the quality of our questioning sometimes, which is being addressed through pre-panel prep sheets, which we've now introduced in the very early teething stages, so panel can formulate their questions prior to panel, and we can look at the relevance, and we can look at making sure they are appropriate at panel, so we can reduce some of the time we spend in panel as well, because that's a stressful experience for people who do attend panel if they're left waiting when we're having additional questions. I think that's one of the ways which we are strengthening panel at the moment. Did you want more?
I think that would do, because he did such a good job earlier in the actual agenda. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to bring Louise in now. Teresa, did you want to say something, and then I'll bring Louise in?
Thank you, Chair. I just really wanted to thank Leanne. I think it is a really, exactly as she says, deep and transparent report, really helpful, really welcome. And I think that kind of real 360-degree look at the whole thing, you know, what can our staff do better, what can we as leaders do better, and what can the panel do better, is absolutely the approach we want to sponsor. And I'm already hearing really positive feedback from families who have been to panel and from staff too. So it's really great to sort of see that real significant improvement, and thank you.
Councillor Biggs in now, Councillor Kirby, if that's okay, because then I want to get Louise to do her report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. A very interesting report. My question is around fostering reviews, focusing on that, because there is mention of streamlining the process, which is all for taking out anything that doesn't need to be done. I suppose my concern is the quality still there by that streamlining process? And you also got a target of doing it within 11 months to do a statutory. Well, I would have thought if it's a statutory to do it within a year, you shouldn't need to set a target to do it within the statutory period, perhaps.
Thank you, Councillor Biggs. If I could just come in here. So the reason why we've set the target at 11 months is because it's all about our scheduling, really, because if we sort of set that at 12 months, then we find ourselves crashing into that 12-month barrier, really. And so therefore, if we bring that forward, then it absolutely supports us in improving our performance. You'll notice in the fostering report that we're not where we need to be just yet. I think it's 61% of our reviews being on time. So we really want to make use of those tools to kind of support our staff to be thinking about those reviews at the very beginning, once they have concluded the previous review. So having that time frame in actually supports us to do that better. Thank you. So if we move on to the annual fostering report. So this report provides an overview of activity from the last financial year and the plans for the service in the forthcoming year. Has been a busy and challenging year within the fostering service, and whilst COVID-19 has sustained logistical challenges for service delivery, it has really shone a light on fostering our carers, their capacity for kindness, innovation, commitment and contribution to service development. During the inspection of Dorset Local Authority services in September, Ofsted noted that foster carers are recruited, supported and trained by experienced and aspirational social workers who support them to understand the trauma that children may have faced earlier in their lives. Through the challenges of several lockdowns, foster carers have been supported well to build and maintain relationships with children. The transformation programme for fostering includes the development of Mockingbird, which alongside an ambitious recruitment and marketing strategy really will support the growth in the number of fostering households, ensuring our children remain close to people and places that they have attachments with. This year, we have welcomed our permanent service manager, our fostering panel chair, advanced practitioner, panel coordinator, 2 fostering social workers, and an advanced practitioner for Mockingbird. And our current vacancies include 2 team managers, 1 for Mockingbird and 1 for the post-approval team. Where there are vacancies in the team, these are being recruited to at pace, and I'm pleased to say that we have really credible candidates in line for those vacancies. The service really knows itself well. It knows its strengths, it knows its areas for improvement, and has a really clear plan to grow and develop over the next year. So really improving on the outcomes for children through placing children locally, enabling them to maintain those relationships with friends, family and community, delivering value for money, reducing the spend on external placements, and also the ability to compete in the market, increasing the number and range of local foster carers with the skills and competencies required to meet our needs, supporting foster carer resilience through the delivery of high-quality supervision and training and access to specialist support, so our psychology support, for example, when needed, and also ensuring that there is sufficient number of foster carers with the right skills in the right location to enable appropriate matching. Are there any questions, please?
Councillor Luck.
Can I just check that everybody's actually got a copy of Leanne's report, because it doesn't appear in the package of documents? Your Louise's does, but your Leanne's. No, I don't think people have.
We'll make sure that
Yeah.
the report has gone out to everyone else. It popped up somewhere within my email. So I will make sure that's done.
Thanks. I've got a question for Louise as well. One thing I'd like us to look at is the way we treat kinship foster carers, because they're a very different circumstance in how they take on looking after children, and they may not have intended to foster, but we tend to treat them the same. And what I'm seeing on panel is that we don't always give them appropriate training. We expect them to do the same training as everybody else, but it may not be relevant to their situation, like FGM training if their children are not from that background. And there are other things that I think we could support them with. I realise that we're very busy, but I think we could actually support them better And I recently attended my first fostering family event, which was brilliant. But I also spoke to a couple who were fostering their grandchild. In fact, I spoke to a couple of couples that were fostering their grandchild, and their experiences with the department could have been better. They weren't complaining, but having been through panel myself and the fostering process, I think, you know, their experience could have been slightly different. And I'd like to go on, for those of you that haven't read Leanne's report, I'd like to say a few things about what's going well and what the challenges have been for the rest of the panel from my point of view. But Leanne has been brilliant at settling people into panel that have come to panel and making them feel relaxed, which is makes the questioning so much easier. She's also introduced us looking at the language that we use about young people and not referring to them as looked after children and placements, etc. And another thing that she's very keen on is the language that we use in the report that we write, so that children who, when they get to 18 and asked to look at their paperwork, can see exactly why the panel made that decision, which I think is very important for them. Not just, this is the decision we've made, it's why we've made it, and I think that's brilliant. What hasn't gone so well from my point of view are the panel sheets, but I'm looking forward to that going on to Teams. I think, you know, that will be a big help. There was something else, but I'll come back to it, let somebody else speak.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lugg, sorry. Yes, I absolutely agree. I think, you know, the changes and the, you know, the way that the panel is moving forward is an absolute strength. I think how language is used is so important. You know, it is a window on our soul. And I think, you know, we are really the authors of our children's stories, and so it's so important that we write those really, really well. I think I'm really interested in your comments regarding our connected carers, and we'll absolutely take that back to the team and have a conversation about, you know, how we can do things better, what does that look like, and ensuring that, you know, the training requirements, etc., are really proportionate to the needs for those carers and the children that they're caring for.
You're looking as though you want to speak, Councillor Kirby.
Yeah, I was indeed. Thank you, Chair. I love the fact we're now psychically linked and you just know when I want to speak. I think we were just really lucky as a corporate parenting board to actually have Kathy and the fact that she sits with both hats. I would love to, and he says looking at the chair here, come along and see a fostering panel in action. I think that I'm always itchy over things that I have no control over, and one of those are the panel. And I'm sure you do a very good job. But yeah, I'd love to come along and see it in action. That's why my original questions were around that level of scrutiny and level of assurance, especially as a corporate parenting panel. And I was wondering how formal we'd like to be in terms of measuring the performance and feeding back. I know that we have the annual report, but how formal do we want to be?
Thank you. Did you want to respond?
I'm sure we can accommodate that, and would be delighted to. But then equally thinking about how we have structured our corporate parenting board informal sessions going forward, I think there'll be lots of opportunity for that scrutiny to take place as part of one of those themed areas that we've chosen to look at.
Sorry, I remembered what else I wanted to say. We had the away day with Mark Finnis, and we came up with a very clear action plan, which was, I'm reading from Leanne's report here because some people haven't actually read it. So the outcome from this day resulted in a clear action plan to support the development of Panel being Dorset's independent critical friend, whilst using the desired strength-based approach of high challenge, high support. I have a bit of a problem with what happened next, because the message was somewhat diluted by being told that we should not be asking questions on matters explored in the paperwork. And I would like to know what corporate parenting think about this, because I'm looking at this manual that I've been given, Safeguarding Children Living with Foster Carers, Adopters and Special Guardians, Learning from Case Reviews. And one of the things that it states is that more than one review commented on the performance of panels and identified insufficient detailed scrutiny and challenge as a key theme. Now, we've had a couple of cases come to panel recently where for deregistration. One is a resignation rather than a deregistration. Okay, that's fine.
What I just had a word with Louise, and I think that this is, now we've got our informal workshop meeting
Okay.
scheduled, I think this is an ideal subject for us to address, if that's okay.
Can we look at that then in one of the informal?
That would be really useful, because we can really drill down in that sort of environment, if that's okay.
Thank you.
We've had to come back.
Sorry, Leanne Chorley, Independent Panel Chair. Just really quickly to reassure everyone that there is the opportunity to challenge on areas of concern if it's not been documented or it's not been analysed enough in the report. There is that scope to have those additional questions. I believe what was meant there is that we need to be mindful of asking questions with regards to potentially someone's health, if that has been explored and identified, and we have received medical advisors' comments in the report. And it's about being mindful of asking questions that are pertinent to panel formulating a recommendation. And if it's not going to affect the recommendation, then we need to be asking, should we really be asking that if they've already explored that with their assessing social worker who they've built that trust and rapport with over the assessment process?
Thanks very much for that clarification. That's good, thank you. I'm going to move on to item 12, Aspire Adoption Annual Report, please. Michelle. Oh, Teresa.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, we have apologies from Michelle Whiting tonight. So I'll take the adoption report through, if that's okay. It's a very clear report. It's our 5th annual report, and I think there's lots of very positive news in there, but it does also give actually a little bit more clarification to the Somerset judgment that I referenced earlier. So importantly, really to note that where the decisions have been made that a child should be placed for adoption, all of our children in Dorset Council area are linked. You'll all know that the Aspire service covers both BCP and Dorset Council, and the important element for us is that they are all linked. There is, as the report outlines, a small delay for some of those children due to the Somerset judgment, but they are already linked, and what that means is they're already attached to an adoptive family. Some of them actually are probably already living with their adoptive family, just waiting for that final piece of important final order. Timeliness is also outlined here as still, sometimes it still seems like an awful long time for us from, 456 days for us here in Dorset, but that's against a national picture of 485. So timeliness is good. These things by nature do take some time. It's important for us to have all of those assessments undertaken. And sometimes, as you'd all appreciate, the court will ask for additional assessments when they're making that decision to sever that lifelong link with their birth family. I draw your attention to the Jake's story on page 80. I won't read it out, but it's a really powerful reminder that not all of the children that Aspire and ourselves manage to place for adoption are straightforward situations or tiny babies. But a 7-year-old there who had been living in a very, very challenging position with some really complex additional needs. Still, the team very strongly committed to getting Jake a family, a forever family, and that was successful. So really, really good news. The other really important piece of change here, and again, very good news, is the early permanence activity. We used to call this in old money fostering to adopt, that we're fundamentally at the point in which a child is removed, and we believe that the likeliest outcome in the court is that they're going to be approved for adoption. We can place them with exceptional foster carers who are going to take that risk fundamentally. And so in the last year, 10 children have been placed for early permanence with their foster carers. What that means clearly is that many of these children who have been babies don't have a move. So they actually are placed with their foster carers, and it's those foster carers, specially approved, specially selected, who then go on to adopt that baby or that child. And that's an incredible increase in performance. We were really in very low numbers there historically, so 10 is really good. And the target for having the number of adopters, and you'll see there's a wild range of adopters coming from different nationalities, different lifestyles, different living arrangements, different genders and sexuality. We have a target of having 30. 30 is achieved. We don't want to have vast quantities of adopters that we're not going to need or be able to use. That would not be helpful to those individuals who would have all of those hopes and opportunities not being realised. So it's important that we stick to that sort of target. And you'll also see there is some communication in the document around what's always probably the more uncomfortable element of this report, which is the financial transactions of when we buy and sell carers. It is something that we do. It's an important thing that we do to make sure that we're maximising the use of carers across the country. There is an error at 3.3, so my apologies. That should say £200,000 rather than the £200. That would have been a worry if we'd had such a disparity in our income. So my apologies. So that at 3.3 it should say 200,000. I'll happily take some questions. I won't be able to answer them anything like as well as Michelle would if she was here, but I will do my best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Richard?
Yes, thank you. So I think it's, again, a really interesting report. What perhaps drew my attention is it's very long, an awful lot to read there. And on page 88, something that sort of struck me down, it always makes me sort of look closely. It said there's a requirement that elected members satisfy themselves that the local authority and the regional adoption agency are working together, etc., to meet the standards. So that, to me, says that this is the only body that effectively has to be satisfied. So just sort of going through on the nod is probably not good enough. We probably need to ask a few searching questions. So we've had your report, Director. We've got the very detailed report. But we've got the board member, elected member, Councillor Parry. So I'd like to ask his view as our representative, elected representative, whether you think it's working. Obviously, we've got a slimmed down version from what we did have, in that we've got 2 authorities, but we've still got 2 authorities, a different dynamic. How is that working to be effective? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Biggs. Yes, I have the opportunity to sit at a board level at Aspire and have input and conversations around the table on what is now a PAN Dorset joint service between us and BCP. Originally, of course, Aspire being the 2 former Poole and Bournemouth Council and Dorset County Council. What we've seen is a sort of evolution of Aspire from its original setup. There was a change of management about 18 months ago now, and a further change when Michelle joined us in the region about 12 months ago. And we have seen a sharper, I would describe it as a sharper focus on things like early permanence, and that's reflected in the report. And I'm generally have quite constructive conversations with my counterparts in BCP about the service. I am very conscious that it is a service that is located inside the BCP area with the management lead provided by them. But I have had conversations with my counterpart there and said at any point if we can be of assistance in providing additional support and leaning in with our expertise, because our journey as a children's services is rather more advanced than BCPs, if I can put it in those terms, then we'd be happy to assist them. What I would also be always prepared to do is take any comments or questions from this board to board meetings of the joint group. Should that be of assistance to you in clarifying any particular points of interest?
And one other point, I think it's page 96, about the governance arrangements. It still refers to Dorset County Council, Bournemouth and Poole. Is that just an error on the detachment, or has they not been updated? Thank you.
Thank you for drawing attention to that. It is just an error, and I think most of us are used to not seeing that these days, but I'll feed back to Aspire. Can I just clarify as well, thank you, Councillor Biggs, ordinarily the annual adoption report also goes to Cabinet, and clearly we could and would be very happy to take that through scrutiny as well, if that was the appropriate thing to do. I think at the moment what we're seeing is a fairly healthy picture, but it may well be that scrutiny wants to keep a track on particularly the Somerset Judgment children, which I think would be perfectly reasonable, or this panel could do that as well and ask for a report back to make sure those have progressed.
Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a brief question on page 86 about special guardianships. I see that obviously the numbers have increased the last 6 months. Is that family members just obviously stepping in there to help with the child? I believe that is. I can see the director's nodding her head. And yeah, so I just wanted clarity on that, because I see obviously that seems to be quite successful. That seems to be, obviously the figures have gone up, so I'm assuming that model is working quite well. I just wanted clarity on that. That was all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Really helpful opportunity to clarify that situation. So when we talk about connected persons, it's kind of clumsy language, but it helps us to, it's not just family members that can either be a kinship carer, although the language would suggest kin is kinship. We talk about kind of connected persons and family and friends, all these sort of various interchangeable language. Fundamentally, if you have an existing solid relationship with the child, you can apply to be either a kinship carer and or to apply for an SGO through the courts, and there's a range of routes for that. We are committed, as we've made very clear in our strategy in the last couple of years, to keep links with children and their families in the widest and extended way possible. So this is part of that ongoing strategy, to say we look deeper, ever deeper, as we're having to think about potentially removing a child from their existing care home, to think, is there anybody else in the family that can also provide that care on an ongoing basis? So sometimes an SGO family will have started out as a kinship carer and will convert. Other times, an existing foster carer who was previously a stranger foster carer, has been caring for the child for some time, will apply to take an SGO. So they won't have actually had any kind of family relationship other than the fact they've been a foster carer for our children. So sorry, rather long answer, but it is a rather complicated area of our work.
Thank you. Going back to what you were saying just now, I think it's really useful to have Councillor Parry there and able perhaps to sort of keeping an eye on things for us, but letting us know if there's any sort of exception so that we can look at it more fully and possibly request a scrutiny at that point, you know, if anything starts to flag up, and members can, you know, can keep a watching brief, as it were, and bring that back to this group if they have any concerns, so that we can always look to scrutinise when it's required. You know, and I think that's where our strength lies, that we're able then to call in a scrutiny if we need to. Councillor Kirby, you had a question. I hope it's going to be quite a quick one.
Yeah, sure. Just look at 3.3 and if those figures are correct.
So quick that it almost missed me. Who?
Sorry, it was answered. Yeah, that's fine.
Yep. Right, thank you. I really just wanted to show you, Councillor Jones, that I was capable of staying within a timescale. If I'd got the right request and instructions, I can obey. Anybody else have a burning desire to add anything to what we've been discussing? No, we've got our next meeting is an informal meeting, yes, I think, isn't it? And we've been flagged up now a couple of things that we want to have an opportunity to look at in informal meetings. At the end of the last meeting, we spoke about member champions, and I think we all now have our briefs on that, and we're starting to have those briefing sessions with officers, aren't we? It would be nice to get feedback on that. Councillor Jones, you've already done that. And hopefully that's going to make us a much stronger board ultimately, because we'll all have a much greater in-depth knowledge on what our officers in children's services are doing and how we can support them in that work. And the more we know, the better we will be. So thank you all for stepping up to that and following through. Thank you all for what I think has been a very useful meeting today. Thanks very much. All have a lovely evening. I hope your meeting goes very, very nicely. Yeah, and you get well received with whatever it is you're talking. Well, I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will be wonderful. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, and good evening to you all.